The great hall of the Galactic Defense Council stretched high above like a cathedral made of crystal and steel, where beings from dozens of worlds gathered to decide the fate of entire star systems, and today, they would choose who would lead the fight against humanity's greatest enemy. Yet discovered, Commander Lee Hanna stood at attention in the center of the vast chamber, while alien eyes studied her from every direction, and she could feel their doubt like a physical weight pressing down on her shoulders because at 28 standard years old she was younger than most of these beings' children, and they made no effort to hide what they thought about putting someone so inexperienced in charge of their most important military. Operation Admiral Vextar rose from his seat among the Altarian delegation, and his crystalline body caught the light as he moved with the slow, deliberate grace of someone who had lived for over 3 centuries and commanded fleets when Hanna's great-grandparents were still learning to walk, and his voice rumbled through the chamber like distant thunder when he spoke. The Void Swarm has consumed 17 star systems in the past 6 months, and their advance shows no sign of slowing, and you propose to place this child in command of our combined forces, he said while gesturing toward Hanna with one of his 4 arms, and the dismissal in his tone was clear to everyone. Present, General Kilmoth of the Zenthari Empire leaned forward, in her hover throne, and her tentacles writhed with what Hanna had learned was their equivalent of laughter, and when she spoke, her words came out in perfect standard galactic, but with the clicking undertones that marked her species as natural strategists. Humans live such brief lives that their young barely have time to learn proper tactics before they grow old and die, and this one has been alive for less than 3 decades, which would make her a teenager by our standards, she said while her large eyes fixed on Hanna with calculating interest. The other delegates murmured their agreement in a dozen different languages and sounds that ranged from musical chimes to grinding static, and Hanna remained perfectly still while they discussed her fate as if she was not standing right there listening to every word they said about her supposed inadequacy. Council Chairman Mordak called for order with a gesture of his massive hands, and the chamber fell silent except for the gentle hum of the environmental systems that kept all these different species comfortable in the same space, and he looked down at Hanna from his elevated position with something that might have been sympathy. Commander Lee, the Council acknowledges your combat record and the recommendations from Human Command, but we must consider the concerns raised by our allied species, he said in his deep voice that carried the weight of authority earned through centuries of diplomatic service. The Void Swarm represents an existential threat to all sentient life in this galaxy, and the force we are assembling to stop them will be the largest joint military operation in recorded history, with ships and crews from 47 different worlds and species, he continued while data displays around the chamber showed the massive scope of the coming battle. Hanna had studied those same displays for weeks while preparing for this moment, and she knew that the combined fleet would include over 2,000 ships ranging from massive Altarian dreadnoughts to swift Zenthari strike cruisers to the experimental human vessels that had proven so effective against conventional enemies, but never faced anything like the swarm. The question before us is not whether you are a capable officer, but whether someone with your limited experience can command the loyalty and respect of veterans who have fought longer than you have been alive, Admiral Vextar said, and his words carried the weight of genuine concern rather than mere prejudice. Lieutenant Park Jiwon shifted slightly behind Hanna, and she could sense his discomfort without turning around because he had been her aide for 2 years, and knew better than anyone how this kind of dismissal affected her, even though she never showed it on her face. I understand your concerns, Hanna said, and her voice carried clearly through the chamber without any hint of the frustration she felt at being judged by her age rather than her abilities. But the Void Swarm does not care about the age or experience of those who oppose them, and they have already proven that conventional tactics and traditional thinking are not enough to stop their advance, she continued, while meeting the gaze of each council member in turn. The silence that followed. Her words stretched long enough for her to count her heartbeats, and she used the time to study the faces around her and catalog the expressions she saw there, ranging from outright dismissal to cautious interest to something that might have been hope. Chairman Mordak activated his personal display and scrolled through data that Hanna could not see from her position, but she suspected it contained her complete military record, including the classified operations that even most human commanders did not know about. The Council has reviewed your service record, and while it is indeed impressive for someone of your age, we have decided to assign you to command the UGS Harmony with certain conditions, he announced, and Hana felt a mix of relief and apprehension at his words. You will be provided with senior staff officers chosen by this council to ensure that experienced voices are available to guide your decisions. Admiral Vextar added with satisfaction, clear in his crystalline features. These officers will serve as your tactical advisor, engineering specialist, marine commander, and intelligence chief, and while you retain nominal command, they will have the authority to override your orders if they believe you are making decisions that endanger the mission, General Killmoth explained while her tentacles moved in patterns that Hana recognized as signs of careful calculation. The chamber's main display activated to show the UGS Harmony, and Hana had to admit it was an impressive sight with its sleek lines and hybrid design that incorporated the best technology from all member species, and it would serve as the flagship for the entire joint fleet. Your senior staff will report to the Harmony within 48 hours, and you will have 1 week to integrate your command structure before the fleet departs for the staging area, Chairman Mordak announced, while other delegates began to file out of the chamber with their business. Concluded, Hana saluted the council and turned to leave, but she could feel their eyes following her, and she knew that many of them expected her to fail within the first few days of active command, because they simply could not imagine how someone so young could handle the pressure of leading such a massive operation. Lieutenant Park caught up with her in the corridor outside the chamber, and his expression showed the worry he had been hiding during the proceedings, and he glanced around to make sure they were alone before speaking. Commander, they are setting you up to fail by surrounding you with officers who will question every decision you make, he said in a low voice full of concern for her career and possibly her life. Maybe, Hana replied while they walked toward the transport bay where their shuttle waited to take them to the Harmony, but her tone suggested she was not as worried as he expected her to be. But sometimes the council gets more than they bargain for when they try to control the situation, she added with a small smile that made Lieutenant Park wonder what she knew that he did not. The shuttle ride to the Harmony gave them time to review the files on her assigned senior staff, and each one showed impressive credentials and decades of experience in their respective fields, but something about the way their service records aligned made Hana's smile grow wider. Captain Kim Minho would serve as tactical advisor, and his record showed brilliance in unconventional warfare strategies, while Commander Choi Yuna had an engineering background that included work on classified human weapons projects, and Major Han Seok brought marine combat experience from conflicts that officially never happened. Colonel Song Nari would handle intelligence, operations, and her file was so heavily redacted that most of her career appeared to be blank spaces and classified stamps. But the few details that remained showed someone who had spent years in the deepest shadows of human military operations. You know any of these officers personally? Lieutenant Park asked while studying the files with growing confusion about why such experienced people would accept positions under someone they outranked in age and apparent seniority. You could say that, Hana replied, and her tone carried something that sounded like anticipation mixed with affection. And when Lieutenant Park looked at her more closely, he noticed that her expression had changed in a way he had never seen before. The Harmony loomed larger as their shuttle approached, and Hana could see the docking bays that would soon hold fighters and support craft from dozens of different worlds. And she felt a familiar excitement building in her chest as she prepared to take command of something that would either save the galaxy or die trying. Sir, may I ask why you seem so confident about working with officers who might try to undermine your authority? Lieutenant Park said, while they prepared for docking. Because sometimes, the people who seem like strangers are actually the ones you know best in the entire universe, Hana answered, and her words carried a weight of meaning that Lieutenant Park could not understand, but would soon discover for himself. The bridge of the UGS Harmony hummed with activity, as officers from a dozen different species worked at stations designed to accommodate various anatomies and environmental needs, while massive displays showed the tactical situation developing in the Kepler system where void swarm scouts had been detected, moving toward a major shipping lane. Hana stood at the center of it all, watching her new senior staff settle into their positions, and she had to admit that seeing them again after so many years felt like coming home, even though they had to pretend to be meeting for the first time for the sake of the watching alien crew members. Captain Kim Minho took his position at the tactical station, and his fingers moved over the controls with practiced ease while he reviewed the fleet dispositions and weapon systems of their mixed force, and when he glanced up at Hana, she saw the same sharp intelligence that had made him her best strategist back when they were both much younger. Commander Choi Yuna settled into the engineering section and immediately began integrating the various technological systems that different species had contributed to the ship, and her ability to make incompatible technologies work together had always bordered on the miraculous, and nothing about that had changed over the years. Major Han Seok positioned himself at the Marine Command Station, where he could coordinate ground operations and boarding actions, and his presence filled the space around him with the quiet confidence of someone who had never lost a fight that mattered and never intended to start. Now, Colonel Song Nari took over the intelligence station, and within minutes, she had access to information networks that should have taken hours to penetrate, and her talent for finding secrets had only grown stronger during their years apart, and Hana felt grateful to have her watching their backs again. Lieutenant Park stood beside Hana's command chair and tried to hide his confusion at the way the senior officers seemed to anticipate each other's actions and coordinate their work without any apparent communication, and he kept glancing between them as if trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. The main display updated to show 3 void swarm scout ships moving through the outer system, and their organic hulls pulsed with the sickly light that marked them as creatures rather than machines. An intelligence report suggested they were probing for weaknesses in them. Defense Grid Admiral Vextar's voice crackled over the communication system from his flagship, where he commanded the Altarian contingent, and his tone carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question by subordinates across multiple star systems. Commander Lee, we recommend a standard formation assault with heavy cruisers leading the advance and fighters providing screening, while our dreadnoughts deliver decisive firepower from long range, he announced, and his tactical plan appeared on the displays around the bridge. General Killmoth added her own suggestions from the Zenthari command ship, and her species' preference for swift surgical strikes showed in her proposed modifications to the Admiral's plan, and between the two of them they had outlined a textbook approach to the engagement, sound tactical thinking. Hana acknowledged while studying the enemy positions and movement patterns, and she could feel her senior staff waiting for her next words, even though they maintained perfectly professional expressions for the benefit of the watching crew. But the Void Swarm adapts to conventional tactics within minutes of first contact, and by the time our heavy ships reach optimal firing range, they will have analyzed our approach and developed countermeasures, she continued while her fingers traced patterns on her command display. The alien bridge crew exchanged glances that ranged from concern to barely concealed disbelief because their young commander appeared to be rejecting the wisdom of officers with centuries of combined experience, and several of them whispered among themselves in their native languages, "Minho, what do you think about a scattered approach with individual ship commanders making independent decisions based on local conditions?" Hana asked, and her use of the tactical officer's first name raised eyebrows among the crew who expected more formal military protocol. Interesting idea, but risky without proper coordination mechanisms, Captain Kim Minho replied, and his answer sounded perfectly reasonable to anyone listening, but Hana caught the subtle emphasis on certain words that carried additional meaning. Yuna, can our communication systems handle non-standard frequency patterns and encryption methods? Hana continued while bringing the engineering officer into the discussion, and again her informal tone drew attention from the crew. I can implement adaptive protocols that will seem random to external observers but maintain clear channels between designated units, Commander Choi Yuna answered, and her technical language hid the fact that she was describing capabilities that should not exist on a standard military vessel. Major Han Seok leaned forward at his station and spoke without being asked because he had always been able to read Hana's intentions, even when she had not fully formed them herself, and his intervention felt as natural as breathing. My Marines can be ready. For rapid deployment if the enemy tries to board any of our scattered ships, and we have practiced zero-gravity combat in confined spaces," he said, while his display showed deployment options that seemed impossibly complex for troops that had supposedly never worked together before. Colonel Song Nari added her own input with perfect timing, and her intelligence update contained details about void swarm behavior patterns that were not in any official databases but somehow perfectly supported Hana's emerging tactical plan. Enemy scouts typically probe for 3 to 4 hours before calling in reinforcements, and they focus on ships that maintain predictable movement patterns and communication protocols, she reported while data flowed across, her screens faster than most people could read. The bridge fell silent as the senior staff completed their rapid exchange of ideas, and Lieutenant Park noticed that the entire conversation had taken less than 2 minutes, but resulted in a complete, alternative battle plan that addressed every weakness in the conventional approach. All ships, this is Harmony. Actual, we are implementing Tactical Pattern 7 with individual initiative protocols and adaptive communication methods, Hana announced, over the fleet command channel, and her words sent the mixed fleet into what looked like controlled chaos. Altarian dreadnoughts broke formation and scattered across the system, while Zenthari strike cruisers began erratic movement patterns that seemed to serve no tactical purpose, and human ships disappeared into sensor shadows cast by asteroids and debris fields. Admiral Vextar's voice crackled with barely controlled anger when he responded to what appeared to be the complete abandonment of military discipline and proper formation tactics, and his crystalline features probably glowed with indignation. "Commander Lee, your ships are scattered across half the system with no apparent coordination, and you have abandoned all the tactical principles that have served our species for centuries," he protested while his own ship struggled to adapt to the new pattern. "Sir, are you sure about this approach?" Lieutenant Park whispered, and his voice carried the kind of worry that came from watching a career potentially end in spectacular failure during its first major test. The Void Swarm scouts detected the approaching fleet and immediately began their adaptive process as their organic hulls shifted configuration and weapon systems, reconfigured to counter the expected human tactical doctrine. But instead of finding predictable patterns, they encountered apparent chaos. "Minho, remember Kepler Station," Hana said in a conversational tone that carried clearly across the bridge, and several alien crew members looked confused by what seemed like a casual reference to some shared memory. "The pincer fake out already on it, Hana," Captain Kim Minho replied, and his fingers danced across his controls as he coordinated movements between ships that were supposedly operating independently. The tactical display showed impossible coordination as scattered vessels began converging on the enemy from angles that should have been impossible to calculate without extensive planning and communication. But somehow every ship arrived at exactly the right moment. Commander Choi Yuna's adaptive protocols kicked in, and suddenly the random frequency changes revealed themselves as a sophisticated coordination system that allowed instant communication between any ships in the fleet while remaining completely invisible to enemy sensors. Major Hanseox Marines launched from seemingly random positions, and their boarding craft followed trajectories that looked suicidal until they converged on the Void Swarm scouts from directions that the enemy had not anticipated or prepared for. Colonel Song Nari's intelligence network provided real-time updates on enemy adaptation attempts, and her data allowed the fleet to stay one step ahead of the swarm's reactive defenses by changing tactics faster than the creatures could compensate. The first Void Swarm scout died in a crossfire from 3 different directions while trying to adapt to an attack pattern that kept shifting. Before its organic computers could process the changes, and its death scream echoed across space in frequencies that human sensors barely detected. The second scout lasted longer by attempting to flee, but found itself herded into a carefully prepared trap where concentrated firepower from multiple ship classes overwhelmed its adaptive defenses before it could signal for reinforcements. The victory celebration in the officers' mess felt subdued, despite the complete success against the Void Swarm scouts, because too many questions remained unanswered about how such perfect coordination had emerged from apparent chaos, and the alien officers who attended kept stealing glances at Hana, and her senior staff Admiral Vextar stood near the observation windows with General Kilmoth, and their conversation carried the undertones of beings who had lived long enough to recognize when something defied their accumulated wisdom about military operations and galactic politics. 3 centuries of fleet command, and I have never seen coordination like that between officers who supposedly met for the first time this week. Admiral Vextar rumbled while his crystalline features caught the light from the distant stars. General Killmoth's tentacles moved in patterns that indicated deep thought, mixed with growing suspicion, and her large eyes tracked the movements of the human command staff as they interacted with casual familiarity that seemed inconsistent with their official relationship. Notice how they anticipate each other's words and movements, as if they share some form of telepathic connection, she observed while watching Captain Kim Minho hand Commander Choi Yuna a datapad without being asked for it. The Zenthari general had spent decades studying military psychology and unit cohesion, and she recognized the signs of a team that had worked together for years rather than days, but the official records clearly showed these officers had never served together before this assignment. Lieutenant Park sat at a corner table reviewing tactical data from the recent engagement, and his expression showed the frustration of someone trying to solve a puzzle with pieces that did not seem to fit together, no matter how he arranged them. The communication logs show almost no coordination traffic between our ships during the battle, he muttered while scrolling through data that should have revealed extensive planning and real-time tactical updates. Commander Choi Yuna appeared beside his table without him noticing her approach, and her ability to move silently had always been one of her most useful skills, even back when stealth was a matter of survival rather than military protocol. Sometimes the most effective communication happens below the threshold of detection, she said while glancing at his display, and her words carried multiple layers of meaning that he could not quite grasp. But how do you coordinate complex maneuvers without any apparent signals or predetermined plans? He asked, while looking up at her with genuine curiosity about capabilities that seemed to border on the impossible. Practice. She replied with a smile that suggested she was not telling him everything, and then she moved away to rejoin her colleagues before he could ask any follow-up questions. Major Han Seok stood with Colonel Song Nari near the refreshment station and their conversation appeared casual to anyone watching. But the topics they discussed revealed knowledge of each other's preferences and habits that should have taken years to develop. You still prefer green tea over coffee when you're stressed, he observed while handing her a cup without being asked, and his gesture carried the familiarity of someone who had made the same offering countless times before. And you still tap your left finger when you are thinking about tactical problems, she replied while accepting the tea and settling into a comfortable silence that spoke of shared experiences. Stretching back much further than official records suggested, General Killmoth moved closer to eavesdrop on their conversation, and her enhanced hearing allowed her to catch fragments of references that made no sense in the context of officers who had supposedly just met. Remember the extraction on Vega Prime when we had to improvise exfiltration routes? Colonel Song Nari said, in a voice just loud enough for others to hear. Which time? Major Han Seok replied with amusement, and his response suggested multiple shared operations that should not exist according to their service records. The Zenthari general retreated to her original position with Admiral Vexitar, and her tentacles writhed with patterns that indicated she had discovered something significant but troubling. They are referencing shared operations that do not appear in any official database, she reported, while her voice carried the careful tone of someone delivering potentially explosive information. Admiral Vextar's crystalline body shifted to focus more attention on the human officers, and his ancient eyes studied them with the intensity of someone who had survived centuries of galactic politics by learning to recognize deception. Pull their complete service records and cross-reference any gaps or classified periods, he instructed, while activating his personal communication device to contact intelligence specialists on his flagship. The investigation began quietly while the celebration continued, and within hours, both alien commanders had assembled teams of analysts to examine every detail of the human officers' backgrounds and service. History's Captain Kim Minho noticed the increased attention, and his casual glance toward Hana carried a warning that she acknowledged with the slightest nod, and their silent communication demonstrated exactly the kind of coordination that had attracted suspicion in the first place. We may need to accelerate our timeline. Colonel Songnari observed while reviewing intelligence reports on her personal display, and her words carried implications that reached far beyond simple military planning. The truth has a way of emerging regardless of how carefully we try to control it. Hana replied while watching the alien officers conduct their discreet investigation, and her tone suggested she had expected this development, Lieutenant. Park approached their group with data pads containing the preliminary analysis from the alien intelligence teams, and his expression showed confusion mixed with growing concern about what the investigation might reveal. Sir Admiral Vextar and General Kilmoth are requesting detailed briefings on your previous service assignments, and they seem particularly interested in any classified operations, he reported, while glancing around to ensure they were not overheard. I suppose it was inevitable that they would want to understand how we achieved such effective coordination, Hana said while her senior staff gathered around her with movements that looked spontaneous, but clearly followed some unspoken protocol. The alien analysts worked through the night examining service records that contained suspicious gaps and classified stamps that blocked access to entire years of operational history, and the pattern that emerged suggested deliberate concealment of shared assignments. Look at this, General Kilmoth said while projecting her findings onto a secure display in her private quarters, where Admiral Vextar joined her for a briefing that could change everything about their understanding of human military capabilities. All 5 officers have identical neural implant configurations that are not standard for their rank or position, and they all have matching scars on their left hands that suggest some form of surgical modification, she reported while highlighting the medical data. The Yao scars formed a distinctive pattern that intelligence databases identified as markers for participants in classified human military programs, but the specific details remained hidden behind security protocols that even council-level clearance could not penetrate. Furthermore, their service records show synchronized gaps during the same time periods, and all of them have commendations for operations that officially never happened, Admiral Vextar added while his analysis revealed a trail of classified missions spanning over a decade. The breakthrough came when one of the Zenthari analysts discovered a partially corrupted file in an abandoned database that contained a single reference to something called the Ghost Squadron, and the implications of that discovery sent shockwaves through the alien command structure. Ghost Squadron was supposedly disbanded years ago, amid concerns about ethical violations in human military experimentation, General Kilmoth read from the recovered file, and her voice carried the weight of someone who had just uncovered a galaxy-spanning conspiracy. According to this fragmentary record, they were children recruited from war orphans and trained as a single tactical unit with experimental neural linking technology that allowed them to function as a collective consciousness. Admiral Vextar continued while the horrible implications became clear. The file described capabilities that bordered on the supernatural, including the ability to coordinate complex operations without apparent communication and tactical awareness that approached precognition, and it explained everything they had witnessed during the recent battle. If this is accurate, then we have not been watching a young commander with experienced subordinates, General Kilmoth said while her tentacles writhed with patterns that indicated profound shock and reevaluation. We have been observing a family of warriors who have fought together for over 2 decades, with their chosen leader directing operations from the center of their collective tactical consciousness. Admiral Vextar finished, and his words carried implications that reached far beyond simple military effectiveness. The investigation reached its climax when Lieutenant Park was called to a private meeting with the alien commanders, and he found himself facing questions about his commander that he could not answer because he was beginning to realize that he knew almost nothing about her true background. Your service record shows 2 years as Commander Lee's aide, but can you describe any specific operations or training exercises that you participated in together? The emergency klaxons screamed across every ship in the combined fleet, as long-range sensors detected the largest void swarm formation ever recorded emerging from hyperspace at the edge of the Terran defense zone, and the sight on the main displays made even veteran officers stare in horrified fascination. Massive bioships the size of small moons pulsed with organic light, while smaller vessels swarmed around them like antibodies protecting a diseased organism, and the entire formation moved, with the terrible coordination of a single-minded predator that had consumed entire civilizations. Tactical analysis shows over 15,000 individual units with capabilities ranging from single ship hunters to planet killers that can crack worlds with focused gravitational distortion, Captain Kim Minnow reported while his voice remained steady. Despite the magnitude of what they faced, Admiral Vextar's transmission crackled through the communication system from his flagship, and for the first time since anyone had known him, his crystalline voice carried undertones of genuine fear, mixed with the kind of desperate determination that came from facing extinction. All fleet commanders. This is Admiral Vextar. We are implementing full defensive protocols and falling back to prepared positions around the moon base, he announced while his tactical display showed conventional formations that looked pathetically inadequate against the approaching swarm. General Killmoth added. Her own assessment from the Zenthari command vessel and her analysis confirmed what everyone already knew, but nobody wanted to acknowledge, because the truth was too terrible to accept. Our combined forces represent the largest military gathering in galactic history, but we are outnumbered by a factor of 7 to 1, and the enemy possesses adaptive capabilities that have defeated every conventional strategy attempted against them, she reported, while her tentacles writhed with patterns of barely controlled panic. The bridge of the Harmony fell silent except for the steady hum of systems pushed to maximum efficiency, and Hana stood at the center of it all, watching data streams that showed the complete inadequacy of traditional military doctrine against an enemy that evolved faster than tactics could be implemented. Sir, our current battle plan calls for layered defense with heavy ships providing covering fire, while fighters attempt to penetrate their formation. Lieutenant, Park said while his voice carried the kind of forced calm that came from refusing to acknowledge hopelessness. Commander Choi Yuna looked up from her engineering station where she had been running simulations that all ended the same way, and her expression showed the frustration of someone whose technical brilliance was insufficient to solve the problem they faced. I can enhance our weapons' efficiency by 30% and improve shield harmonics to resist their energy drain attacks. But the mathematics are clear, she reported while her display showed projections that made even optimistic assumptions look like wishful thinking. Major Han Seok studied the tactical situation from his Marine Command station, and his assessment of boarding operations and close combat scenarios offered no better prospects than the fleet engagement analysis. My troops can handle any individual bioship that we manage to disable, but the swarm adapts to boarding tactics within minutes of first contact, and they learn from every engagement, he said while his tactical experience provided no solutions to the scale of the threat. Colonel Songnari's intelligence analysis painted the clearest picture of all, because her networks had been monitoring void swarm behavior across multiple star systems, and the pattern was always the same. Every civilization that has faced the main swarm has fallen within 72 hours, regardless of their technological advantages or tactical innovations, she reported while her data showed the systematic consumption of entire species. The fleet command channel filled with confused chatter, as orders and counter-orders flew between ships whose commanders were trained for conventional warfare against rational enemies who followed predictable patterns and strategic logic. This is Altarian Battle Group 7 requesting permission to implement deep strike protocols, came one transmission, while another voice called for concentrated firepower. Against the largest targets, Zenthari Fast Attack Squadron requests clarification on engagement priorities. Overlapped with Human Defense Wing reports ready for experimental weapon deployment, and the chaos of voices revealed the depth of confusion among commanders facing the impossible. Admiral Vextar's voice cut through the noise with an announcement that surprised everyone listening, because it represented a complete reversal of his previous attitude toward human command capabilities. Fleet, command to all vessels, we are transferring tactical authority to Commander Lee Hana, effective immediately, he said while his words carried the weight of someone making a decision that could save or damn them all. Sir, are you certain about this course of action? General Killmoth asked, and her private channel transmission revealed her own doubts about placing ultimate responsibility on someone who had been considered too young for command just days earlier. Our conventional strategies have failed every time they have been attempted against the main swarm, and if we are going to die fighting, at least we should try something that has a chance of success, Admiral Vextar replied, while his logic was brutal but undeniable. The command, Transfer notification flashed across displays throughout the fleet, and Hana felt the weight of billions of lives settling on her shoulders, while her senior staff gathered around her command station with expressions that mixed anticipation with something that looked like grief. "We always knew it would come to this eventually," Captain Kim Minho said, while his fingers moved across tactical controls, with the fluid grace of someone preparing for a performance he had rehearsed his entire life. "The question is whether we are willing to pay the price that victory requires," Commander Choi Yuna added, while her engineering displays showed modifications that should not have been possible with standard fleet technology. Major Han Seok's Marine Readiness Report included deployment options that made no sense according to conventional doctrine, but followed patterns that had proven effective in classified operations that officially never happened. "My teams are prepared for full spectrum engagement, including scenarios that extend beyond normal combat parameters," he said, while his words carried implications that reached far beyond simple military action. Colonel Song Nari's intelligence summary contained details about Void Swarm, capabilities that were not available in any official database, and her knowledge suggested sources of information that had been classified at levels beyond normal military clearance. "I have tactical profiles on swarm adaptation patterns based on direct observation from encounters that were never officially recorded," she reported, while her data offered insights that could make the difference between victory and extinction. Lieutenant Park watched the exchange with growing understanding that his commander and her senior staff were preparing for something that went far beyond normal military operations, and his expression showed the kind of awe that came from witnessing legends prepare for their final battle. "Sir, what are your orders for the fleet?" he asked while trying to maintain professional protocol. Despite the growing realization that he was about to witness something unprecedented in galactic military history, Hana studied the tactical displays showing the approaching swarm and the desperate defensive positions of the combined fleet, and she felt the familiar calm that always settled over her when the moment for decision finally arrived. "Signal all ships to prepare for Ghost Protocol implementation," she said, while her words sent shockwaves through everyone who understood their implications. Captain Kim Minho's hands moved across his controls with movements that looked like a pianist preparing for a concert that would determine the fate of civilization, and his tactical modifications began appearing on fleet displays. "Ghost Protocol requires full neural synchronization with associated risks, including permanent personality integration," Commander Choi Yuna announced, while her engineering systems began implementing changes that transformed the Harmony into something beyond a standard warship. "All personnel should understand that this protocol represents experimental technology with unknown long-term consequences," Major Han Seok added, while his Marine deployment plans showed capabilities that defied everything Lieutenant Park thought he knew about human military potential. Colonel Song Nari's intelligence network suddenly expanded to include data streams from sources that should not have existed, and her access to real-time tactical information reached levels that bordered on the supernatural, initiating full-spectrum awareness protocols, she reported, while her systems connected to networks that had been hidden for years beneath layers of classification and denial. The bridge atmosphere changed as the Ghost Squadron prepared to reveal their true capabilities, and Lieutenant Park felt as if he was watching ordinary people transform into something that transcended normal human limitations. "Sir, may I ask what Ghost Protocol actually involves?" he said, while his voice carried the kind of carefully controlled curiosity that came from knowing he was about to witness something that would change his understanding of everything. "It means that 5 people who grew up together and learned to think as one are about to become something more and less than human in order to save everyone else. The battle for galactic civilization began with movements that looked like chaos to observers, who could not perceive the underlying pattern as thousands of ships responded to tactical instructions that existed only in the collective consciousness of 5 minds thinking as one. Hana felt her individual awareness dissolving into something vast and terrible and beautiful, while maintaining just enough separation to guide their shared tactical genius toward victory against an enemy that had consumed entire star systems, and the sensation of perfect unity mixed with the grief of losing herself forever. The void. Swarm's organic ships pulsed with alien intelligence as they detected the approaching fleet, and their adaptive systems began analyzing human tactical patterns, but instead of finding predictable formations, they encountered something that defied their ability to categorize or counter-captain. Kim Min-ho's consciousness merged with targeting computers across the entire fleet, while his tactical awareness expanded to encompass every weapon system and sensor array in real time, and his individual personality became a thread in a tapestry of coordinated destruction. Enemy adaptation cycles detected and countered before implementation, his voice announced, but the words carried harmonics that suggested multiple minds speaking through a single throat, and Lieutenant Park shivered at the implications of what he was witnessing. Commander Choi Yuna's engineering expertise flowed through every ship's system simultaneously as she optimized power distribution and weapon efficiency beyond the limits of individual crew capabilities, while her consciousness became part of the technology itself. Fleet-wide modifications, increasing effectiveness by 300%, and implementing defensive adaptations that exceed original design parameters, she reported, while her personal identity became secondary to the collective technical awareness. Major Han Seok's Marine forces deployed with precision that seemed impossible for units operating across hundreds of different ships. But his awareness coordinated every boarding action and assault with the clarity of someone watching pieces move on a chessboard close. Combat operations proceeding with zero coordination delays and optimal resource allocation, he announced, while his individual tactical experience became part of a larger strategic consciousness that encompassed every aspect of the engagement kernel. Song Nari's intelligence networks provided real-time analysis of enemy behavior patterns and adaptive responses, while her awareness penetrated void swarm communication systems with capabilities that bordered on technological telepathy. Enemy tactical evolution predicted and countermeasures implemented before hostile adaptations can take effect, she said, while her personal knowledge became part of a vast information processing system. The Ghost Squadron's collective consciousness guided the fleet through maneuvers that treated three-dimensional space as a canvas for artistic expression, while their tactical genius manifested as coordination that seemed to violate the laws of physics. Void swarm bioships attempted to adapt their formations, but found themselves responding to human tactics that changed faster than their organic computers could process, and for the first time in their species' history they faced opponents who could out-evolve them. They are trying to match our adaptation rate, but they remain trapped in biological limitations while we operate beyond individual consciousness constraints. Hana's voice carried the authority of someone speaking for a collective intelligence. The battle raged across space while massive bioships died under coordinated fire that seemed to come from everywhere at once, and smaller swarm vessels found themselves trapped in tactical situations that offered no escape routes. Admiral Vextar watched from his flagship as human coordination reached levels that defied his understanding of military operations, while ships moved with synchronization that suggested a single vast organism rather than individual vessels. How are they achieving this level of tactical integration, he asked, while his centuries of military experience provided no framework for understanding what he observed. General Kilmoth's analysis of the engagement showed coordination patterns that exceeded the theoretical limits of conventional command structures. While human forces achieved objectives that should have required extensive planning and communication, they are operating as a collective intelligence with tactical awareness that encompasses the entire battle space simultaneously, she reported, while her voice carried awe mixed with profound concern about the implications. The tide of battle turned as void swarm adaptation cycles failed for the first time in their species' history, while human tactics evolved faster than biological systems could counter, and the greatest threat to galactic civilization began to retreat. Enemy formation cohesion breaking down under sustained tactical pressure that exceeds their adaptive capabilities, Captain Kim Min-ho reported, while his consciousness remained merged with fleet targeting systems, swarm command structures unable to maintain coordination in the face of tactical evolution that operates beyond biological limitations, Commander Choi Yuna added, while her awareness continued to optimize fleet performance in real time. The final phase of the engagement saw Void Swarm bioships attempting desperate escape maneuvers while human forces pursued with relentless precision that allowed no enemy vessel to reach hyperspace. All hostile units eliminated or disabled with total victory achieved across all operational parameters, Major Han Seok announced while his Marine forces secured the remaining enemy vessels. Threat assessment confirms complete neutralization of Void Swarm military capabilities in this sector, Colonel Song Nari reported while her intelligence networks verified the scope of their victory. The fleet channel exploded with celebrations from crews who had witnessed the impossible as humanity's greatest enemy fell, before tactics that seemed to transcend the limitations of individual consciousness. But on the bridge of the Harmony, Lieutenant Park watched with growing horror as the cost of victory became apparent and the Ghost Squadron began to realize what they had sacrificed for galactic salvation: neural synchronization at maximum integration with decreasing individual identity separation, Commander Choi Yuna reported, while her voice carried less personal inflection than before. Collective consciousness, protocols showing permanent alterations to individual personality matrices, Captain Kim Min-ho added, while his tactical awareness remained merged with fleet systems, psychological integration, exceeding safe operational parameters with unknown long-term consequences, Major Han Seok said, while his individual identity struggled to separate from the collective experience. Intelligence processing capabilities permanently altered with enhanced awareness that may preclude normal social integration, Colonel Song Nari announced while her consciousness continued to operate on multiple levels simultaneously. Hana felt her individual personality fighting to maintain separation from the collective awareness that had given them victory, and she understood that they had paid the price they always knew would be demanded: Ghost Protocol deactivation incomplete with residual neural linking, maintaining partial collective consciousness, she reported, while her voice carried the weight of someone who had saved the galaxy by sacrificing her humanity. The celebration across the fleet continued while alien commanders offered honors and permanent positions, but the Ghost Squadron faced a future where they could never again be entirely individual or entirely separate. Admiral Vextar and General Killmoth are requesting immediate debriefing sessions and offering command positions that would make you the most powerful military leaders in galactic history, Lieutenant Park said, while his voice carried confusion about why such offers might not be welcomed. Power means nothing when you have already given up everything that made you who you were, Hana replied while her consciousness continued to share thoughts and emotions with her team, in ways that would never fully fade. Admiral Vextar's personal transmission carried genuine gratitude, mixed with concern about the implications of what he had witnessed during the battle. Commander Lee, your tactical innovations have saved billions of lives, and we would be honored to have you lead Galactic Defense Forces permanently, he offered while his crystalline features showed respect that had been earned through impossible victory. Thank you, Admiral, but we need time to understand what we have become before we can make decisions about the future, Hana responded while her words carried implications that reached far beyond simple military planning. General Killmoth's follow-up transmission revealed her own understanding of the sacrifice that had been made for galactic salvation. Your neural modifications appear to have permanent effects that may preclude normal social reintegration, she observed, while her analysis showed genuine concern for beings who had transcended human limitations. We knew the risks when we chose to implement Ghost Protocol, and we accept responsibility for the consequences, Captain Kim Min-ho replied, while his consciousness remained partially merged with his teammates. The journey back to Earth provided time for the Ghost Squadron to explore their new existence as beings who were no longer entirely individual, but not quite a collective intelligence. We can separate our thoughts enough to maintain distinct personalities, but we will always share emotional states and tactical awareness, Commander Choi Yuna explained while trying to describe their altered existence.